the restaurant, my son shouted, "This table is for family only." Minutes later, the owner sarcastically called me the Lady of the Manor. The echo of those words still rings in my ears like the chime of broken bells. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for just a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I only ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening myself. My name is Carol Ann Miller. I'm 67 years old. And until 3 months ago, I thought I knew the meaning of the word family. I live in a small apartment in Greenwich Village, in New York City, where the walls seem to listen to my lonely conversations, and the aroma of morning coffee is the only thing that keeps me sane. My daily uniform consists of these floral blouses I sew myself, because my hands like to keep busy, and these leather shoes that squeak against the linoleum when I walk through my empty kitchen. It was a gray Tuesday in November when I got that call. The phone rang 3 times before I could get to it from the small balcony where I was watering my geraniums, the only living creatures that seemed to appreciate my care without asking for anything in return. The voice on the other end was my daughter-in-law, Patricia, but she sounded distant, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. "Carol, it's Sophia's birthday this Saturday," she said, without preamble, without the, "How are you?" that used to accompany our conversations. "Robert says you can come if you want, but we already have the reservations made and, well, I don't know if there will be much room." My granddaughter, Sophia, 8 years old, with a smile that used to light up my afternoons when I watched her while her parents were building their future. The little girl who would fall asleep in my arms listening to the stories I made up about brave princesses who never needed rescuing. "I just want to see her blow out the candles," I told her, pressing the receiver to my ear as if that could bring me closer to the warmth that once existed between us. "I don't need anything else." "Well, as long as it won't be awkward for anyone." Those words fell on my chest like drops of hot wax. Awkward? Me? The woman who had sold her mother's jewelry to help them with the down payment on their house. The one who had given up my own retirement plans to take care of Sophia during her first years of life. The one who had cooked hundreds of Sunday roasts that they devoured without a thank you, while talking about their next vacation to places I only knew from television. I hung up the phone and stood there, in the middle of my living room, surrounded by photographs that documented a life dedicated to others. On the mantel was the photo of Robert's first communion, my only son, where I stood smiling, proud, holding his hand as he looked at the camera with the confidence only children who know they are loved possess. Next to it, their wedding photograph, where I was in the second row, discreetly dressed in beige because Patricia had insisted that bright colors distract from the bride. The chosen restaurant was the Gilded Orchard, one of those places on the Upper East Side where the menu has no prices and the waiters treat customers with the calculated courtesy reserved for those who can afford the luxury of not asking how much anything costs. I arrived on time, as always, wearing my best navy blue dress, the one I had first worn to Robert's graduation 15 years ago, and that still held the quiet elegance my mother had taught me to value. In my hands, I carried a small box wrapped in gold paper that I had saved since Christmas. Inside was a bracelet with a heart-shaped charm that had belonged to my grandmother, engraved with Sophia's date of birth. I had intended to give it to her on her 15th birthday, but something in my chest told me I might not get another chance. The entrance of the restaurant greeted me with that air conditioning that smells of money and artificial roses. The maitre d', a man with a neat mustache and a professional smile, looked at me with the expression reserved for those who clearly don't fit into the postcard of affluence the place sold to its regular clients. "Ma'am?" he asked, with a politeness that sounded more like an interrogation than a welcome. "I'm here for Sophia Miller's birthday party. I'm her grandmother." His eyes scanned me from head to toe, lingering on my shoes. Comfortable, practical, but obviously not the brand he expected to see, before consulting a list on his podium. "One moment, please." While I waited, I could see through the glass into the main dining room. There was Robert, my son, wearing the gray suit I had helped him pick for his last job interview. He was laughing, raising a glass of wine, surrounded by people I didn't recognize, but who clearly shared the financial comfort that had always eluded me. Patricia wore a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and her jewelry sparkled under the ceiling lights like tiny stolen stars. And there, in the center of it all, was Sophia, my granddaughter, my little princess. She wore a pink frilly dress that made her look like a porcelain doll, and her brown hair was in two pigtails adorned with ribbons that Patricia had surely chosen to match the table decor. The maitre d' returned with that same smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid I don't have you on the list, ma'am. Are you sure you're expected?" Before I could answer, I saw Robert walking toward us. His steps were slow, deliberate, as if every foot he crossed cost him a piece of his soul. When he reached me, our eyes met for the first time in months, and in his, I saw something that froze my blood. "Shame. Mom," he said. But his voice was hollow, as if the words were coming from far away. "I didn't know you. I thought you weren't coming. Your wife invited me," I reminded him, keeping calm though I felt something breaking in my chest. I said I only wanted to see Sophia blow out the candles. Robert glanced back toward the table, where Patricia was watching him with an expression I had learned to interpret as a silent command. Then he looked at me again, and what came out of his mouth was like a knife wound wrapped in an apology. "It's just, this table is for family only, you know? Patricia organized everything very carefully, and she doesn't want things to get complicated today." The world stopped. The restaurant's chatter became a distant murmur. The air grew thick, hard to breathe. "But I am your mother," I whispered, and those 5 words came from my throat like a lament. "Yes, but you know how Patricia is. If you want, there's a free table near the terrace. You can order whatever you like, I'll take care of the bill." And that's when I understood. It wasn't an invitation. It was charity. It wasn't a place in the family. It was an emotional handout. After 67 years of life, 41 of motherhood, and 8 of being a grandmother, I had been reduced to an inconvenience that had to be tucked away in a corner so as not to ruin the perfect photograph of their lives. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice to say anything more. I took my purse, clutched the small gold box to my chest, and followed the waiter to that solitary table from where I could watch, but not participate, in my own granddaughter's celebration. From that corner table by the terrace, where the cold November air seeped through the window cracks, I could see everything with a clarity that hurt more than 1,000 knives. Sophia blew out her candles while everyone applauded, and I mentally counted the years I had been the one organizing her birthdays. The first 5, to be exact. Back when Patricia worked those impossible hours at her law firm, and Robert was constantly traveling for his export company. I remembered my wrinkled hands decorating chocolate cakes in my small kitchen, mixing the batter while Sophia slept in her stroller next to the table. I remembered the sleepless nights when she was teething, rocking her feverish little body while her parents slept because they have important meetings tomorrow. I remembered every dollar I took from my Social Security to buy her clothes when she grew so fast that Patricia said she couldn't keep up with all the expenses. The small table where they had placed me had a dried coffee stain in the corner and a wobbly chair that creaked every time I moved. The waiter, a young man with a polite Southern accent, approached with the forced kindness used on customers who clearly won't be leaving a generous tip. "What can I get for you, ma'am?" "A coffee with milk, please," I murmured, though what I really wanted was to run out of there and not stop until I reached my apartment, where at least the walls didn't judge me for not having enough money or status to sit at my own family's table. While waiting for my coffee, I took out the old smartphone Robert had given me 3 Christmases ago, one of those basic models, because at your age you don't need to complicate things with all that technology, Mom, and started scrolling through my saved photos. There was Robert at 7, missing his 2 front teeth, hugging me after his first school play where he had been a shepherd in the nativity scene. I had sewn his costume from scraps because we couldn't afford to buy one from the school store. There he was at 18, graduating from high school, with that proud smile when he was announced as a partial scholarship recipient for college. A partial scholarship that I completed by selling my engagement ring from my late husband, the ring I had promised to save for Robert's future wife, but which I exchanged for his business administration tuition, because it's my future, Mom. We have to invest in my future. And then there was the photo from the day he introduced me to Patricia. It was in my own home, a Sunday after church. She arrived in heels that clicked against the linoleum like hammer blows, evaluating every corner of my modest home with a gaze that classified everything into categories of useful or disposable. I remember she sat on the sofa I had reupholstered 3 times over the years and commented, "How cozy. Very quaint." The coffee arrived lukewarm and watery, but I drank it without protest because protesting no longer made sense. From my corner, I could hear fragments of conversation from the main table. Patricia was talking about their upcoming vacation to the Maldives. Because Sophia needs to see the world, she can't grow up limited. While Robert nodded like one of those bobblehead dolls people put on their car dashboards. I wondered when my son's metamorphosis had begun. When did he stop being the boy who asked me to sing him lullabies when he had nightmares, and become this man who looked at me as if I were an uncomfortable memory of a past he preferred to forget? Maybe it was when Patricia started whispering in his ear that a successful family can't carry the weight of past mistakes. Or maybe it was when they started making real money, and my small apartment in Greenwich Village no longer seemed picturesque, but depressing. Zod, the first time I realized something had changed was 2 years ago, on Christmas Eve. We had always celebrated at my place. It was tradition. I would cook the roast I bought with the extra money I saved for months, prepare the Christmas cookies I had learned to make from my mother, and decorate the tree with ornaments Robert had made in elementary school. Those little papier-mâché balls painted with tempera that were worth more to me than any crystal ornament from a department store. But that year, they called me on December 23rd. "Mom, we've decided to do something different this Christmas," Robert told me in the voice he used when he had to lay off employees at his office. "Patricia booked a stay at a spa hotel. We need a family vacation, just the 3 of us." "And me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "You can do whatever you want. Relax, watch TV. Not have to cook for anyone." As if cooking for my family had been a burden instead of an act of love. As if those hours I spent in the kitchen preparing their favorite dishes had been sacrifices instead of the happiest moments of my year. I spent that Christmas Eve alone, watching the ball drop in Times Square on TV while eating a ham and cheese sandwich. The tree I had decorated with such excitement looked ridiculous in my empty living room, and the papier-mâché ornaments seemed to cry glittery tears under the blinking lights. But the worst came the next day. As I was cleaning up the remnants of my solitary celebration, the doorbell rang. It was my neighbor from the 2nd floor, Margaret, with a plate of fudge. "Carol, dear, how was your Christmas Eve?" I didn't hear a peep from upstairs. "Fine," I lied. "Very quiet. It's just that I saw the pictures on your daughter-in-law's Facebook. What an elegant hotel. Sophia looks so happy in the pool. Pictures." They had been posting pictures on social media. Pictures of a happy family enjoying a perfect vacation, without mentioning they had left their mother and grandmother alone on Christmas Eve, without explaining that the woman who had raised that boy didn't even deserve a phone call during the most important holiday of the year. That night I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my husband's funeral. But these tears were different. I wasn't crying for an unavoidable loss like death. I was crying for a chosen betrayal, for a calculated abandonment, for the systematic humiliation by someone who had sacrificed everything to give them the life they were now using to exclude me. Now, sitting at that miserable restaurant table, watching Sophia open gifts that cost more than my monthly Social Security check, I remembered all the times I had said yes when I should have said no. All the times I had emptied my savings account to cover their emergencies. All the times I had canceled my own plans, the few times I had them, to babysit Sophia when they had unavoidable commitments, the bill for Robert's cell phone when he was unemployed for 6 months, the repair of Patricia's car after their accident, the living room furniture they bought on credit that I ended up paying off when their finances got temporarily complicated, the down payment for the house they now lived in a neighborhood where a woman like me could only enter as a housekeeper or a cleaning lady. It all adds up. It all accumulates. It all becomes a silent debt that they had decided to repay with contempt instead of gratitude. The waiter approached again, this time with less patience in his smile. "Will you be ordering anything else, ma'am? We have a waiting list for tables." A waiting list. Of course. I was occupying a space that someone more important could use. Someone who would spend more money. Someone who mattered. No, thank you. Just the check for the coffee. $3.50. The price of being tolerated at my own granddaughter's celebration. As I searched for change in my purse, that faux leather purse, worn at the corners but still functional because I'm not one to throw things away just because they aren't perfect, I saw Sophia get up from her chair. For a moment, I thought she was coming toward me. My heart raced with that foolish hope that abandoned grandmothers have. But no, she was heading to the restroom, accompanied by Patricia, who didn't even glance in my direction. It was then that I asked myself for the first time in my life, am I being used? I paid for my coffee and sat there, motionless, watching my family's life continue on 60 feet away, my presence or absence not altering its perfect rhythm in the slightest. Patricia had started handing out small gift boxes to the guests, those elegant party favors that women of her social class considered essential to keep up appearances, while Robert chatted animatedly with an older man in an impeccable suit who gestured as if he were closing some important deal. Sophia was playing with a new doll, one of those that cost over $100 and speak 3 languages. I remembered the rag doll I had made for her last year, hand-stitched during long, sleepless nights, with fabric scraps I had saved for years. Patricia had lost it 2 days after I gave it to her. She dropped it at the park, she had said with that smile that didn't reach her eyes. You know how kids are with homemade things. Homemade. As if the love I had put into every stitch was something inferior, something that deserved to be discarded because it didn't have a brand name tag. My phone vibrated. A text message. It was my neighbor from the 5th floor, Rose, a woman my age who cleaned offices in the financial district and had become my only confidant during these recent years of growing loneliness. Carol, how's the party? Got any pictures of the princess yet? Princess. That's what Rose called Sophia, with the tenderness she reserved for the few good things left in our lives as forgotten grandmothers. Rose understood because she had a similar story, a daughter who had moved to San Francisco with her tech mogul husband and visited once a year, at Christmas, for exactly 2 hours before leaving to celebrate with the in-laws at some 5-star hotel. I didn't know what to reply. How could I explain that I was sitting at a punishment table like a disobedient child? How could I tell her that my own son had demoted me to the category of awkward relative to be tolerated from a distance? It's lovely, I finally typed. I'll tell you later. I put my phone away, and that's when something happened that I will never forget. Sophia came running toward my table, with the spontaneity that children have before they learn the invisible rules that separate people according to their social value. Her little eyes shone with the pure joy I remembered from when I used to watch her for hours, inventing games and songs so she wouldn't miss her parents. "Grandma Carol!" she yelled. And for a moment, my heart filled with a hope so intense it hurt. "Look at my new doll. She speaks English." She sat in the empty chair across from me without asking permission, with the naturalness only children who haven't yet learned that love can be conditional possess. She started showing me all her toys' features, pressing buttons and laughing every time the doll uttered a phrase in a language I didn't understand. "Do you like her, Grandma? Dad says she's very expensive, but that I deserve her because I'm doing so well in school." "Ah, she's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, my voice breaking slightly because it had been months since I'd had a chance to talk to her without Patricia's constant supervision, who monitored every conversation as if I were a virus that could contaminate her daughter with inappropriate ideas about life. "And do you have a present for me?" she asked, with the brutal innocence of children. I took the small golden box out of my purse. My hands trembled as I unwrapped it. My grandmother's bracelet shone under the restaurant lights like a promise of continuity, like an invisible thread connecting generations of women who had loved unconditionally and given everything without expecting anything in return. "This was from Great-Grandma Carol," I explained as I fastened it on her tiny wrist. "It was her grandmother's, and her grandmother's grandmother's. Now it's yours." Sophia looked at it with those enormous eyes, which filled with an admiration that reminded me why every sacrifice, every dollar saved, every sleepless night had been worth it. "Is it really old?" she whispered, touching the charm with the reverence children reserve for things they feel are special. "Very old, and very special, just like you." That's when Patricia appeared like a storm dressed in black. Sophia, what are you doing here? Her voice had a coldness I had learned to fear. I told you not to bother people when they're eating. She's not bothering me, I started to say, but Patricia cut me off with the smile she used as a weapon. Carol, please, we understand you want to be near the child, but today is a very special day, and we've invited very important people. We don't want Sophia to be distracted from her guests. Her guests. As if Sophia wasn't also my granddaughter. As if I didn't have the right to 5 minutes of conversation with the girl I had helped raise when they were too busy building their careers to change diapers or make baby food. But Mom, Grandma Carol gave me a really pretty bracelet. Sophia held up her small wrist to show off the gift, but Patricia immediately pushed it down. How interesting, Patricia said, examining the bracelet as if it were an insect she had just discovered in her food. It looks very vintage. Vintage, another elegant word for old and worthless. Come on, Princess, let's go show it to Daddy and the guests. Patricia took Sophia's hand with a firmness that allowed no resistance. Say goodbye to Grandma Carol. Bye, Grandma, Sophia said, looking back at me over her shoulder as Patricia led her away. Thanks for my present. And then I saw something that froze my blood. Patricia stopped next to a decorative trash can near the restrooms, looked around to make sure no one was watching, and with a quick, precise movement, unfastened the bracelet from Sophia's wrist and dropped it in the trash. My bracelet. My grandmother's bracelet. 4 generations of family history thrown in the trash like a used tissue. Sophia didn't notice because Patricia distracted her by talking about some new game they had prepared at the main table. But I saw it all. I saw how she discarded my family heritage with the same ease as someone getting rid of an annoying wrapper. I stood up like an automaton and walked to the trash can. My legs were shaking, but I managed to get there. There it was, among dirty napkins and food scraps, the bracelet that had survived wars, depressions, moves, and losses. I picked it up and cleaned it with my handkerchief, feeling something shatter definitively in my chest. I returned to my table and sat down very slowly, as if any sudden movement could make me fall apart completely. I held the bracelet in my hands, and for the first time in my life, I understood with absolute clarity what it meant to be considered trash by your own family. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a dry, sharp pain, like a piece of broken glass lodged somewhere vital in my soul. From my table, I could see Patricia whisper something in Robert's ear, and how he nodded without even looking in my direction. I watched her arrange the guests for a group photo, ensuring everyone looked perfect for the picture she would surely post on her social media to show the world what a prosperous and happy family they had. A family that clearly had no room for a 67-year-old widow living on a modest social security check, who had the bad habit of reminding them of their less glamorous past. The waiter with the southern accent approached again, this time with even less patience in his expression. Ma'am, I'm afraid we need the table. We have more reservations. I stood up without protest. I put the bracelet in my purse along with the shreds of my dignity and walked toward the exit. As I passed by the celebration table, Robert looked up for a second. Our eyes met, and in his, I saw something more painful than all of Patricia's contempt. I saw relief. Relief that I was leaving. Relief that he wouldn't have to explain to his elegant guests who that old woman was, who clearly didn't belong in his new life. I left the restaurant with the bitter taste of humiliation in my mouth and a crystal-clear certainty in my heart. After 67 years of giving unconditional love, it was time to learn how to receive it, or to learn to live without it. That night, in my silent apartment, I poured myself a glass of the cheap wine I kept for special occasions that never arrived. I sat on my reupholstered sofa, my grandmother's bracelet in my hands, and made a decision that would change everything. I was no longer going to ask for permission to matter in my own family's life. That decision, made on my sofa with a trembling wine glass in my hand and my grandmother's bracelet pressed to my chest, materialized in the most unexpected way 3 days after Sophia's birthday. It was a gray Wednesday, the kind New York offers in November when the sky looks like a dirty blanket spread over the city, and I was at the Union Square Green Market buying vegetables for a soup only I would eat. I had developed a habit of talking to the vendors as if they were old friends, because sometimes they were the only real conversations I had all week. I was picking out tomatoes when my phone rang with the shrill ringtone Robert had set, so, "You don't lose it, Mom." It was Patricia. Her voice sounded different, sweeter, like poisoned honey. "Carol, how are you? I hope you didn't feel unwell on Saturday. You know how these celebrations are, so formal." A lie. She didn't feel bad about anything. She was calling because she needed something. "I'm fine, Patricia. What do you need?" A silence. I had learned to read my daughter-in-law's silences like others read the newspaper. This one had the specific texture of someone about to ask a very big favor. "Well, it's just an incredible opportunity has come up for Robert. A promotion at his company, but it requires him to travel to London for 6 months. It's the position he's always wanted, Carol. His big break. I'm happy for him," I said, though something in my stomach clenched like a fist. "The problem is Sophia. We can't take her because she has to finish the school year here, and I can't stay either because my firm is expanding, and I need to oversee the opening of our new office in San Francisco. It's a crucial time for both of us." There it was. The perfectly constructed trap. The request wrapped in urgency and opportunity. "What exactly are you asking me, Patricia? For her to stay with you? Just 6 months? Well, maybe 8, depending on how everything goes. We could pay you something, of course. About $400 a month for extra expenses." $400. To take full-time care of an 8-year-old girl. To cook, clean, take her to school, help with homework, and attend to her medical, emotional, and social needs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In my 600-square-foot apartment with my limited resources, with my health that was no longer what it used to be. "And why don't you hire a nanny?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Oh, Carol, you know we don't trust strangers. Sophia needs to be with family, with someone who truly loves her. Family, true love." The same words they had used to exclude me from the restaurant were now becoming the key to unlock my unconditional obligation. "I need to think about it," I said. "Think about it?" The sweetness vanished from her voice like cheap varnish in the rain. "Carol, she's your granddaughter, your only granddaughter. How can you think about it?" And there it was, the emotional blackmail I knew so well. Guilt as a tool of manipulation. The implication that any hesitation on my part automatically made me an unnatural grandmother. "I'll call you tomorrow," I said, and hung up before she could press me further. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen, drinking chamomile tea and running numbers that didn't add up. My Social Security check was $800. The rent, $400. Utilities, $100. Food for myself, $150 if I was careful. Medicine, $80. That left $70 for everything else. Clothes, transportation, small emergencies, an occasional treat like a magazine or a coffee with Rose. Adding an 8-year-old girl to that equation was mathematically impossible. Sophia ate like 3 adults. She would constantly need new clothes, school supplies, after-school activities, medical expenses if she got sick. The $400 Patricia offered wouldn't cover half of the real costs. But what hurt most wasn't the money. It was the way they had presented the situation. It wasn't, "Carol, we need help, and we value what you would do for us." It was, "Carol, it's your obligation because you're family, and we'll pay you a little something so you don't complain." I got up and went to the drawer where I kept my important papers. There was the notebook where I jotted down all the loans I had given them over the years. Loans they had never mentioned repaying, that they had probably forgotten completely. $500 for Patricia's car repair in 2019. $1,000 for the down payment on the living room furniture in 2020. $800 when Robert was unemployed for 3 months in 2021. $300 for Sophia's class trip to Washington, D.C. $200 for the joint Christmas gift they had given Patricia's parents. But that I had paid for because they were a little tight that month. In total, over $3,000 in the last 4 years. $3,000 from my modest income, given without conditions, without repayment terms, without even an acknowledgement that it had been given. Now they needed something bigger. Not just money, but time, energy, living space, physical and emotional health. And they asked for it as if it were a minor favor. as if looking after a child for 8 months was the equivalent of borrowing my can opener. The next day, I called Rose. I needed to talk to someone who understood my position, someone who had navigated the treacherous waters of adult children who confuse love with availability. "Come over for coffee," she said. "I've got some of the muffins I made yesterday." Rose's apartment smelled of cinnamon and that clean loneliness of older women who have learned to take care of themselves. We sat in her small kitchen, surrounded by plants she doted on like grandchildren, and I told her everything. $400? Rose almost choked on her coffee. "Carol, I make more than that cleaning offices 4 hours a day. But she's my granddaughter, Rose. She's the only one I have. And you're the only grandmother she has. Why does that automatically make you responsible for solving her parents' problems?" Rose had a direct way of putting things that comes from having lived too long to waste time on euphemisms. "My daughter did the same thing to me 5 years ago," she continued. "Asked me to watch my grandkids while she moved to San Francisco with her new husband. Just for a little while," she said. "Until we get settled." You know how long that little while lasted? 2 years. 2 years of taking care of 2 kids on my pension, in my apartment, with no help from anyone, and when she finally took them back, she didn't even thank me. She said it was my decision to help her. And what did you do? What I should have done from the start. I said no. No. Such a small and impossible word. A word that women of our generation had learned to avoid as if it were blasphemy. "And you didn't feel guilty?" Rose looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Carol, do you feel guilty when you can't give them money you don't have? Do you feel guilty when you can't perform miracles? Guilt is a luxury only people with real options can afford. We don't have them." That afternoon, I walked home with Rose's words echoing in my head like bells. I poured myself another glass of wine. I was drinking more lately, small sips of liquid courage that helped me face truths I didn't dare see sober, and dialed Patricia's number. "Carol, so glad you called. I was getting worried. When can you start with Sophia? We need to have everything organized by next week." "I can't do it, Patricia." Silence. A different silence from yesterday. This one had the texture of shock, of someone who has just heard something that did not compute with their understanding of the natural order of things. "What do you mean you can't?" "Carol, she's your granddaughter." "Exactly. She's my granddaughter, not my responsibility. You are the ones who have decided to leave. Find a solution that doesn't involve me sacrificing my life and my finances to make yours easier." "Sacrifice your life?" "Carol, please, don't be dramatic. It's just watching a little girl. Just watching a little girl. For 8 months. For $400. In my apartment. On my income. With my health. But you've always helped. You've always been there for us. Always." The word that had become an invisible chain around my neck. Because I had always helped, I was now condemned to help forever, no matter the cost to me. "Well, not anymore," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Firm. Clear. As if I had found something I had lost years ago without realizing it. "Carol, you can't do this to us. Robert is counting on you. Sophia needs you. Sophia needs parents who take responsibility for her. And you two need to learn that my love is not free." I hung up before she could reply. My hands were shaking, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear or anxiety. It was from a strange feeling that took me several minutes to identify. It was power. The power to say no. The power to choose. The power to value my own life as much as I had always valued theirs. The call came at 6:30 the next morning. The phone rang with the insistence of an emergency, waking me from a deep sleep. The first in weeks where I hadn't woken up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. It was Robert, and his voice had a hardness I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, and I had grounded him for failing math. "Mom, what in the world did you say to Patricia? She's hysterical." Hysterical. The word men use when women react with genuine emotion to situations they'd rather keep under control. "I told her I can't take care of Sophia for 8 months, I replied, surprised at how calm my own voice sounded. "You can't?" "Mom, come on. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. I've been waiting 5 years for a promotion like this." 5 years. For 5 years he had been waiting for something he felt he deserved, while I had been waiting 43 years for someone to treat me as if my time, my money, and my energy had value. Robert, you need to find another solution. There are daycares, nannies, boarding schools. Daycares? Mom, Sophia is 8 years old, and nannies cost a fortune. Don't you understand that this promotion is for our future? For Sophia's future? Their future. It was always about someone else's future, never about Carol's present. Never about the 67-year-old woman who had mortgaged her own future time and again to smooth their path. And what about my future, Robert? Don't I have the right to plan my life? Your life? Mom, you're 67. What plans could a woman your age have that are more important than helping her family? Those words hit me like an icy slap. A woman my age. As if turning 67 was equivalent to forfeiting any right to self-determination. As if my desires, my needs, my dreams had automatically expired the day I reached some arbitrary age. I'm hanging up, I said simply. Mom, don't hang up. We need to talk about this. But I had already ended the call. I sat on the edge of my bed, trembling not from cold, but from rage. A rage that had been growing for years somewhere deep in my chest and had finally broken the surface. 2 hours later, my apartment buzzer rang. 3 long rings and 2 short ones, the code we had set when Robert was a boy coming home from school. But when I opened the door, it wasn't the child I remembered. It was a 41-year-old man with deep circles under his eyes and an expression that wavered between pleading and threatening. He wasn't alone. Patricia stood behind him, dressed in the kind of aggressive elegance she wore when she wanted to intimidate. And Sophia was clinging to her hand with the confusion of a child used as an emotional shield in battles she doesn't understand. Can we come in? Robert asked, though they were already stepping inside without waiting for an answer. Patricia scanned my living room with that look that took inventory of everything she deemed inadequate. The reupholstered sofa, the curtains I had sewn myself, the family photos in cheap frames, the coffee table I had fixed 3 times because I couldn't afford a new one. Carol? Patricia began in the voice she used with incompetent employees. I don't think you understand the situation. This opportunity for Robert could change our lives. We could move to a better neighborhood. Sophia could go to a private school. We'd have money for things we can't afford now. Things they couldn't afford. As if I had been swimming in wealth all these years while subsidizing their dreams with my poverty. Besides, she continued, I thought you'd be thrilled to spend quality time with Sophia. You barely see her lately. I barely saw her because they had set increasingly strict rules about when, where, and how I could interact with my own granddaughter. Because my visits disrupted Sophia's routine. Because my apartment wasn't the most stimulating environment for a growing child. Because my ideas on parenting were a bit outdated. Sophia let go of Patricia's hand and came to me. In her eyes, I saw something that broke my heart. Hope. Hope that Grandma, as always, would say yes. That she would solve the problems the adults didn't know how to handle. That she would sacrifice whatever was necessary so that her world could continue to run smoothly. Grandma Carol, she said in the little voice she had used since she learned to talk to get whatever she wanted from me. Can I stay with you? Mommy says you're going to travel and it would be fun, like a vacation. A vacation. They had sold my sacrifice to Sophia as if it were a gift. As if having to completely adapt my life to the needs of an 8-year-old girl was an exciting adventure, instead of an economic and physical burden that could finally break me. Sophia, honey, I said, kneeling to be at her level. I can't take care of you for that long. Grandma isn't as young as she used to be. But you've always taken care of me, she protested, her eyes filling with tears that pierced me like daggers. Don't you love me anymore? Patricia smiled with the cruel satisfaction of someone who has just played their winning card. She had trained Sophia to use emotional blackmail with the same effectiveness she herself employed. My love for my granddaughter had become a weapon they could use against me whenever they needed something. I love you more than life itself, I told Sophia, and it was the absolute truth. But loving you doesn't mean I have to say yes to everything they ask of me. Even grandmothers have the right to say no when something is too much for them. Robert stepped forward then, and for a moment I thought he might understand, that he might remember that I too was a person with my own limits and needs. Mom, he said, his voice laced with the soft manipulation he had perfected over the years. "You know we would never ask you for something like this if it wasn't really important. And it's not like you'll be alone with her. She'll be in school most of the day. You just need to be there in the afternoons, make dinner, help with her homework. Just. As if caring for an 8-year-old was a part-time job. As if it didn't involve 24-hour responsibility, constant worry, uncalculated expenses, physical energy I no longer had in abundance. And what if she gets sick?" I asked. "What if she has nightmares? What if she needs to go to the doctor or the dentist? What if she just misses her parents and needs more attention than I can give?" "That's what phones are for," Patricia said with the coldness she used to solve problems she didn't want to face directly. "We can have video calls every day." Video calls. As if virtual contact could replace physical presence when a child needs comfort in the middle of the night. As if a screen could replace a mother's hug when the world becomes confusing and scary. "No," I said, my voice sounding firmer than I felt inside. "I can't do it. You have to find another solution." Patricia drew herself up like a cobra, ready to strike. "You know what, Carol? I think you're becoming selfish in your old age. You didn't used to be like this. You used to understand what family meant. Selfish. The word manipulative people use when someone finally refuses to be exploited. The accusation emotional blackmailers throw when their victim develops healthy boundaries. I used to be foolish," I replied. And the rawness of my own words surprised me. I used to think that giving everything of myself would make me a good mother and a good grandmother. Now I know it just made me a person who was easy to use. The silence that followed was so thick it seemed to have physical weight. Sophia looked at me with wide eyes that didn't understand why the conversation had become so tense. Robert looked like a fish out of water, opening and closing his mouth without finding words. And Patricia looked at me with a hatred so pure it frightened me a little. "Fine," she said finally, grabbing Sophia's hand more forcefully than necessary. "It's clear where your priorities lie. Let's go, Robert. We'll have to find someone who does understand what family loyalty means." They headed for the door, but Robert stopped at the threshold. He turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a boy, and I had denied him something he really wanted. "Mom," he said, and there was genuine pain in his voice. "I hope you're happy with your decision, but don't come crying to us later that we don't see you enough. Don't come to us saying you feel lonely." And they left, taking Sophia, who looked back at me over her shoulder with a heartbreaking confusion. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing as if I had just run a marathon. For the first time in my adult life, I had put my needs before my family's. For the first time, I had said no to something everyone assumed I should accept without question. And I felt strange, not exactly good, but not bad either, as if I had crossed an invisible line into an unknown territory where the rules I had lived by my whole life no longer applied. That night, I called Rose. "How do you feel?" she asked after I told her everything. "Like I've done something both terrible and liberating." "That," she said, "is exactly what freedom feels like when you've just discovered it." The days following the confrontation passed in a strange state of suspended time, as if the world had decided to give me a break to process what I had done. For the first time in decades, my phone wasn't ringing with urgent requests, favors disguised as family emergencies, or calls where my voice was needed only to confirm that I was still available to solve other people's problems. The silence was deafening, but also revealing. I realized I had been living for years in a state of constant alert, waiting for the next crisis that would require my intervention, the next sacrifice that was expected of me without question. Now, for the first time, I could plan my day without consulting anyone else's needs. On Friday morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I put on my best blouse, the blue one with small embroidered flowers that I had saved for special occasions that never arrived, and went for a walk through the city that had lived around me without me ever noticing its beauty. I walked through Central Park like a tourist in my own city, watching the families stroll, the old men playing dominoes on the benches, the young couples taking pictures by the fountains as if every moment was worth preserving. I sat on a bench near the conservatory garden and watched a woman about my age feeding ducks with bread she'd brought in a cloth bag. She wore a simple but elegant dress, comfortable but pretty shoes, and her face had a serenity that I found almost enviable. She didn't look like she was waiting for anyone to need her. She didn't seem to be available to solve others' crises. She was just there, enjoying a moment she had gifted herself. When she finished with the ducks, she approached my bench. "May I sit? These shoes are losing the battle against the cobblestones." I smiled and made room for her. Her name was Eleanor. She was 65, and she had been a history teacher until her retirement last year. She had 2 adult children who lived their own independent lives and visited when they wanted to, not when she needed them to feel useful. "Do you know what the best part of retiring was?" she asked after we chatted for a while about the park, the weather, the small things normal people talk about when they aren't urgently solving someone else's problems. "Realizing that I have time to be myself, instead of being what other people need me to be." Those words struck me like a revelation. When was the last time I had been myself? When had I made a decision based on what I wanted, instead of what others expected of me? "And your children don't expect you to be available for—" I began to ask. "For what? They're adults. They have their jobs, their families, their lives." I raised 2 independent, functional men, not 2 men perpetually in need of their mommy. Eleanor had a direct way of speaking that was refreshing after years of navigating conversations full of insinuations and veiled emotional blackmail. "But if they need help, if they need genuine help, I'm there. But there's a difference between needing help and needing someone to solve your problems, because it's more convenient than solving them yourself." I thought about those words all the way home. How many of the crises I had solved over the years had been genuine problems, and how many had been simple inconveniences my family preferred to offload onto me rather than face themselves. That afternoon, when Rose came to visit with a frittata she'd made because I had extra eggs, I told her about my encounter with Eleanor. "Sounds like a smart woman," Rose said as we shared the frittata in my small kitchen. "So, what are you going to do with all this newfound wisdom?" It was a good question. For 67 years, I had defined my self-worth through my usefulness to others. I was a good mother because I sacrificed my needs for Roberts. I was a good grandmother because I was available for Sophia no matter the circumstances. I was a good person because I never said no when someone needed something from me. But now that I had said no, that I had set a boundary, I was faced with a terrifying question. Who was Carol Miller when she wasn't being useful to anyone? "I think I need to figure out what I like to do," I told Rose. "Things I want to do for myself, not things other people need me to do." Rose smiled with the complicity of women who have reached a certain age and have begun to value their own company over the approval of others. "Do you remember what you liked to do before you became a mother?" The question left me speechless. I had become a mother at 24, newly married, in an era where a woman's destiny seemed predetermined. Wife, mother, caregiver, until the end of her days. What did I like to do at 23? It was like trying to remember a dream that fades upon waking. "I like to read," I finally said, "and to sew, but things for myself, not out of necessity. And I like to walk, to explore the city." And what happened to that Carol? She became the Carol that others needed. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't turn on the television to watch the shows that filled the silence of my apartment. Instead, I searched the back of my closet for a box I had kept for decades. Inside were the books I had read when I was young, some underlined with notes in the margins written in a handwriting I barely recognized as my own. There were romance novels that had made me dream of grand adventures, poetry books I had memorized when I believed beautiful words could change the world, even a few travel books with pictures of places I had planned to visit someday. I opened one at random, Women Who Run with the Wolves, by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. On the first page was a note in my youthful script, "For when I'm brave enough to live my own life. Carol, 1978. 45 years later, I was finally beginning to understand what that younger version of myself had meant. On Monday morning, I made a decision that would have seemed insignificant to anyone else, but was revolutionary for me. I enrolled in an art history course at the local community center. It was something I had always been interested in but never had time to explore because there was always something more urgent demanding my attention. The first class was about the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which was only a 20-minute subway ride from my home, but which I had never visited because I'd always had something more important to do. Listening to the instructor talk about Rembrandt and Vermeer felt like waking up from a very long dream. During the break, a woman about my age approached me. "Is this your first time taking a class here?" she asked. "Yes. In fact, it's the first time I've taken a class of any kind in many years. I signed up after my divorce," she confessed. "After 30 years of marriage where everything revolved around what he wanted to do, I suddenly found myself with free time and no idea how to fill it. These classes saved my life." Her name was Marilyn. She had raised 3 children who now had their own families, had worked as a secretary for decades, and at 60 had decided it was time to do something purely for fun. "And what do your kids think about you studying art?" At first, they thought it was a whim. Now they don't even remember. They're too busy with their own lives, which is exactly how it should be. After class, Marilyn invited me for coffee at a cafe near the center. She had that vibrant energy of people who have discovered something new about themselves after years of routine. "You know the strangest thing about starting to do things for yourself after so long?" she asked as she stirred her latte. "You realize that the person you were before you became so-and-so's mother, so-and-so's wife, so-and-so's grandmother, that person is still in there. She was just waiting for you to give her permission to come out." That evening, when I got home after my first adventure in self-discovery in decades, I found 3 missed calls on my phone. All from Robert. He hadn't left any messages. For the first time in my life, I didn't call back immediately. Instead, I made a simple dinner just for me, opened a bottle of red wine I had been saving for a special occasion, and sat on my balcony to watch the sunset over the rooftops of Greenwich Village. The phone rang again at 9. This time, I answered. "Mom, where have you been? I've been calling all day." "I've been busy," I said, and it was the first time in years those words had left my mouth without an attached apology. "Busy? With what?" "With my life, Robert." The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. For 41 years, his mother had been immediately available, no matter what she was doing, because she had never been doing anything important enough not to be interrupted for him. "I need to talk to you," he finally said. "I'm here." "No, in person." "Tomorrow." "I can't, tomorrow. I have plans." Another long pause. "What plans?" And for the first time in my life, I thought, that's none of your business. My plans for Tuesday were a visit to the Met, which I had scheduled as part of my art history course. Something as simple as walking through halls where centuries of human genius hung on the walls. But for me, it represented a revolutionary act of self-determination. For the first time in decades, I had decided to do something simply because I felt like it, without consulting if someone else needed my time, my money, or my energy. I was contemplating Rembrandt's Aristotle with a bust of Homer, trying to understand why the instructor had said it was a mirror of reality that showed more than it concealed, when my phone vibrated. Robert. Again. I turned the phone off without answering, and continued to admire how the light seemed real in that 400-year-old painting. When I left the museum 3 hours later, I had 8 missed calls and 2 voicemails. The first was from Robert. "Mom, I need to see you urgently. Something has happened." The second was from Patricia. "Carol, Robert is very worried about you. Please, call us." Worried. The word they used when they couldn't reach me immediately. The word that turned my independence into a pathology. My right to a life of my own into a source of anxiety for them. I walked to a cafe near the museum and ordered a latte. As I drank it, watching people pass by on the street with their seemingly sorted-out lives, I dialed Robert's number. "Mom! Finally! Where have you been? I've been calling all day." "At the Met," I said with a calmness that surprised me. "The Met? What were you doing there?" As if it were inconceivable for a woman my age to go to a museum for pleasure. As if visiting one of the world's most important art collections was an activity so strange for someone like me that it required an explanation. "Looking at paintings, Robert. It's what people do in museums." "Mom, we need to talk. Now." "Patricia found a nanny for Sophia, but she costs $3,500 a month. We can't afford that for 8 months. We need you to reconsider your decision. $3,500. The real price of caring for an 8-year-old child? Almost 9 times what they had offered me. 9 times the value they assign to my time, my energy, and my well-being. Robert, I already told you no, but you don't understand. If I don't take this promotion, there might not be another chance for years. And Patricia has already put her career on hold too many times for the family. Her career on hold. For the family. As if raising her own daughter was a heroic sacrifice instead of a basic responsibility of parenthood. Where are you? He asked suddenly. In a cafe. Which one? I'm on my way. No, Robert, don't come. If you want to talk, you can come to my apartment tonight. At 8. Tonight? But it's urgent. Everything is always urgent for you. For me, not anymore. I hung up before he could protest and ordered another latte. For the first time in years, I had the luxury of drinking my coffee slowly, unhurriedly, watching New York flow around me like a river I had finally learned to swim in. At 8 o'clock sharp, my buzzer rang. But when I opened the door, it wasn't just Robert. Patricia was there too, holding a folder of documents that suggested they had prepared for this conversation like a business presentation. Carol, Patricia began before even stepping inside, we've been thinking, and we believe we've found a solution that benefits everyone. They sat on my reupholstered sofa as if it were an office desk, and Patricia opened her folder with the efficiency of someone used to closing deals. We spoke with a lawyer, she said, pulling out printed papers. If you take care of Sophia for these 8 months, we can set up a legal contract where you are listed as her temporary guardian. That would entitle you to certain tax deductions, and we could also pay you $800 a month instead of $400. $800. They had raised the offer because they realized I knew the real price of childcare. But it was still less than a quarter of what the professional nanny cost. And what's more, Patricia continued, when we get back from London, we could discuss the possibility of you moving into an apartment near us. A smaller one, easier to maintain. We could help you with the rent in exchange for you being available to look after Sophia whenever we need you. Help me with the rent, in exchange for being available. A contract of domestic servitude disguised as family generosity. Are you finished? I asked. Robert and Patricia exchanged a look. They had expected their improved proposal to be irresistible to a woman of my age and financial situation. Mom, Robert said in the voice he used as a boy when trying to convince me he'd done his homework when he clearly hadn't. It's a good offer. Think about it. You'd have more money, a nicer place, and you'd be close to us. Close to them. To be available whenever they needed me. To be the resident grandmother who solved any inconvenience related to Sophia's care. To definitively give up any pretense of an independent life. And what happens if I say no? I asked. Patricia sat up straighter on the sofa, like a snake preparing to strike. Well, Carol, we hope it doesn't come to that. But if you refuse to help your own family at such an important time, we will have to reconsider many things. What things? Sophia's visits, for example. We can't allow such an impressionable child to be exposed to selfish attitudes. It wouldn't be good for her emotional development. There it was. The threat I had been waiting for since the moment I first said no. If I didn't submit to their demands, they would take my granddaughter away from me. They would use my love for Sophia as a club to beat me into submission. I see, I said, my voice strangely calm. Either I agree to become your unpaid domestic employee, or I lose contact with my granddaughter. Don't put it that way, Robert protested. We just want what's best for everyone. What's best for you, I corrected him. You want what's best for you, at the expense of what's best for me. I stood up and went to the cabinet where I kept my important papers. I took out the notebook where I had recorded all the loans I had given them over the years. Before you decide what kind of contact I'm going to have with my granddaughter, I said, sitting back down across from them, I want you to know exactly what kind of grandmother you've had all these years. I opened the notebook and began to read. $1,000 for your car repair in January 2019. $2,000 for the down payment on the living room furniture in March 2020. $1,500 when Robert was unemployed in 2021. $400 for Sophia's class trip to D.C. $300 for the Christmas gift for your in-laws. Patricia had gone pale. Robert was staring at his hands as if he'd never seen them before. In total, I continued, $5,200 from my Social Security in the last 4 years. Money you never mentioned paying back. Money you took for granted because it was your mother and grandmother giving it. Mom, Robert began, but I cut him off. I'm not finished. In addition to the money, I have cared for Sophia for hundreds of hours, for free. I have cooked family dinners that you ate without contributing $1. I have washed and ironed Sophia's clothes, gone to parent-teacher conferences when you were busy, taken my granddaughter to the doctor when she had a fever and you had work commitments. I got up and walked to the window. New York City glittered in the dark, full of lights representing lives I didn't know, people who had perhaps learned to value themselves before the age of 67. And now, I said without turning around, after years of giving everything I had, you threatened to take my granddaughter away if I don't agree to give even more. Carol, Patricia said in the voice she used for difficult clients, no one is taking anything away from you. We are simply establishing healthy boundaries. I turned to face them. Patricia wore the expression she had perfected for when she didn't get what she wanted. A mix of victimized indignation and a veiled threat. Healthy boundaries, I repeated. Do you know what my healthy boundary is going to be? I pulled a piece of paper from my purse. It was something I had prepared that afternoon, after talking with Rose and thinking hard about what Eleanor had told me in the park. From now on, I read, I will not lend money I can't afford to lose. I will not babysit Sophia for more than 4 hours at a time without at least 1 week's notice. I will not cook for family gatherings unless I am explicitly invited and asked what I can bring. And above all, I will not allow anyone to use my love for my family as a tool for blackmail. The silence that followed was so profound, I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock. And if we don't accept these conditions? Patricia asked with the coldness she reserved for her most calculating moments. Then you'll have to learn to live without me, I said, and the words came out with a firmness I didn't know I possessed. Just as I'll have to learn to live without you. Robert stood up abruptly, with the expression of a child who had just discovered his mother had limits. Mom, you can't be serious. Robert, I said, and my voice had a serenity that surprised even me. I am 67 years old. How many years do you think I have left to be happy? Am I going to waste what's left being miserable so that you can be more comfortable? They walked to the door without another word. Patricia clutched her folder of useless papers to her chest like a shield. Robert walked like a man who had just discovered the ground beneath his feet wasn't as solid as he'd believed. At the threshold, he turned one last time. Mom, I hope you know what you're doing. For the first time in my life, I told him. I do. 6 months after that final confrontation, I'm sitting on the patio of a small cafe in the West Village, watching the April sun paint the cobblestone streets of New York gold. In front of me is a book on Renaissance art that I'm reading for my advanced art history course, a cup of coffee that I ordered without looking at the price, and for the first time in decades, a calendar full of plans I made for myself. The Carol of 6 months ago wouldn't recognize the woman I am now, not on the outside. I'm still the same 67-year-old woman with hard-working hands and wrinkles that tell stories of a life lived, but on the inside, where something fundamental has been rearranged, as if the foundation of a house had been replaced, and now the whole structure is more solid. The first month after Robert and Patricia left my apartment was the hardest. Not because I missed the constant drama or the exhausting demands, but because the silence confronted me with questions I had been avoiding for decades. Who was I when I wasn't being useful to others? What brought me joy when it wasn't someone else's gratitude? How do you build a life of your own at 67? The answer came gradually, in small daily discoveries. I discovered that I liked waking up early not to make breakfast for others, but to watch the sunrise from my balcony with a cup of tea in my hands. I discovered that I enjoyed cooking when it was for myself, experimenting with flavors I'd never tried because I had always cooked what others expected. I discovered I had opinions about art, about politics, about books. Opinions that had lain dormant for years under the constant need to keep the family peace. Rose became my partner in adventure in this new life. Together, we joined a hiking group for seniors that takes trips to the Hudson Valley on weekends. Together, we discovered we could afford small luxuries when we weren't constantly bailing out adult children from their financial crises. Together, we learned that friendship between women our age could be deep, authentic, fun, without the complications of unchosen family obligations. "You know what I like most about our new life?" Rose asked me last month as we admired the view from Bear Mountain. "That no one expects us to be saints. We can just be human, with flaws, with limits, with needs of our own that are no less important than anyone else's, just because we're old enough to be mothers and grandmothers." My art history course became more than just an activity to fill time. I found I had a knack for seeing patterns in paintings, for understanding how artists used light and color to tell stories. Marilyn, my classmate, convinced me to sign up for a painting workshop as well. "You don't have to be Picasso," she told me. "You just have to enjoy moving the brush." My first painting was terrible. Muddy colors, impossible proportions, a sunset that looked more like a nuclear explosion. But there was something deeply satisfying in creating something with my own hands, something that existed because I had decided to create it, not because someone else needed it. Now, 6 months later, my paintings are still imperfect, but I like some of them enough to hang them in my apartment. They are small declarations of independence, visual reminders that Carol Miller exists as a whole person, not just as an extension of her family's needs. Money, surprisingly, stopped being a problem. Without the constant loans to Robert and Patricia, without the expense of watching Sophia every weekend, my modest Social Security check stretched to cover not only my basic needs, but also a few small pleasures. New books instead of just used ones, tickets to exhibits, an occasional dinner at a restaurant where I didn't have to calculate every dollar. In February, an unexpected letter arrived. It was from a law firm, informing me that I had inherited from a distant aunt in Vermont who had died childless. It wasn't a fortune, $50,000 and a small, run-down country house. But it was more money than I had ever had in my life, money that was entirely mine, with no strings attached, no family expectations about how I should spend it. The first thing I did was cry, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in my adult life, I had a financial cushion, the security of knowing I could face a medical emergency or a home repair without having to ask anyone for money. The second thing I did was buy a plane ticket to Paris. A week in the City of Light, visiting museums, walking through neighborhoods I only knew from photographs, eating in bistros where no one knew I was an American grandmother who had needed 67 years to give herself permission to travel. At the Louvre, looking at the Mona Lisa among the crowds of tourists, I thought about the woman I had been just 8 months ago, that Carol would never have allowed herself to spend money on something so frivolous as a trip, that Carol would have found 1,000 reasons why others needed that money more than she needed to see Paris. But this Carol, the new Carol, had learned that taking care of herself wasn't selfishness, but responsibility. She had learned that her happiness had intrinsic value, not just value based on what she could give to others. In April, 2 weeks before I sat down on this patio to write these reflections, I got a call from Robert. I hadn't heard from him since that confrontational night in my apartment. His voice sounded different, more mature, perhaps, or just more tired. "Mom," he said, "I wanted to let you know that Patricia and I are getting a divorce." I wasn't surprised. A marriage built on convenience and the exploitation of external resources rarely survives when those resources dry up. "Are you okay?" I asked, and my question was genuine. Despite everything, he was still my son. "I'm learning." It turns out taking care of an 8-year-old girl with no outside help is harder than I thought. There was a long pause, heavy with everything he wasn't saying. "And Sophia?" "Sophia's fine. She asks about you a lot." My heart clenched, but in a different way than it used to. It was no longer the pain of forced separation, but the natural sadness of missing someone you love. "I'd like to see her," I said. "Could you come for dinner on Sunday?" Just the 3 of us. No drama, no requests, just dinner. I went. Robert had learned to cook. Badly, but he had learned. His apartment was messier than Patricia would have ever tolerated, but it felt more like a home where real people lived instead of a showroom to impress guests. Sophia hugged me as if 8 months hadn't passed. With that ability, children have to live in the present without holding grudges. She showed me her drawings, told me about school, asked me to help her with a puzzle she had started but couldn't finish. During dinner, Robert apologized. Not one of those empty apologies that are really just requests disguised as remorse, but a real apology that came from finally understanding the weight of what he had lost. "I didn't know," he said while Sophia was playing in her room, "what your life had been like all those years. I didn't know what we had been taking from you. And now you do? Now I wake up at 6 in the morning to make Sophia's breakfast, take her to school, pick her up, help with her homework, make dinner, give her a bath, read her a story, make sure she doesn't have nightmares. And that's just a normal day. And I do it on a salary that allows me to hire help occasionally." He nodded, looking at his hands as he had so many times as a child when he knew he had done something wrong. "You did it for years, on a Social Security check that wasn't enough to hire anyone, and you helped us financially on top of it all." "Yes," I said simply. "Can we try to build a different relationship? One where I don't use you as the solution to my problems?" I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. There was something different about him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like humility. "We can try," I said, "but on my terms. Now we see each other once a month. He cooks or I cook. We take turns. Sophia comes to my apartment some Saturday afternoons, but for specific, planned periods, not as emergencies that interrupt my life. And when he needs help, real help, not convenience disguised as an emergency, he asks for it as a favor, not as an obligation. This morning, while I was reading my book on this sunny patio, a woman in her 40s approached my table. She had that exhausted expression I recognize immediately, that of someone giving everything of themselves to keep other people's lives running. "Excuse me," she said. "I've seen you reading here several times. You look so serene. Can I ask you how you do it?" I looked at her and saw the Carol of 8 months ago, a good, generous woman who had confused love with total availability, who had built her identity on being indispensable to others. "You learn," I told her. "You learn to love yourself enough to say no." We chatted for an hour. Her name was Anne. She had 3 children and a dependent mother who expected her to solve all her problems. She worked part-time and dedicated the rest of her life to being the glue that held her extended family together. "But if I say no," she said, "who's going to do everything I do?" "Maybe no one," I replied. "And maybe that's exactly the point." After she left, I thought about all the women like us out there, sacrificing without limits, believing it makes them better people instead of victims of their own misdirected kindness. The sun is setting over New York, painting the sky with the same colors I've been learning to use in my paintings. Tomorrow is Thursday, which means I have my painting class in the morning and my book club in the afternoon. On Friday, Rose and I are going to see a Georgia O'Keeffe exhibit at the Whitney. On Saturday afternoon, Sophia is coming over to help me bake cookies, just as we agreed last week. It's a small life, perhaps, compared to the grand adventures others have at my age, but it's mine, completely mine, built according to my desires, my rhythms, my limits. And for the first time in 67 years, that feels like enough. Have you ever experienced anything like this? Do you know someone who sacrificed so much for their family that they forgot who they really were? Leave me your answer in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so this message can reach someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, one person's story can change another's life.